The wind cut through the alleyways, carrying the scent of frozen pavement and damp brick. It was Christmas Eve, but the city had gone silent. Streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the empty roads. No laughter drifted from the windows above. No warmth radiated from the storefronts. Arthur walked alone, his boots crunching rhythmically against the layer of ice and slush. He kept his head down, eyes fixed on the path ahead, watching his own breath bloom into thick white clouds that vanished into the dark. Every step felt heavy. The house was waiting for him, but it was a house stripped of its center. Since his wife passed, the calendar had become nothing more than a series of dates to endure. He reached his front door and paused, hand hovering over the cold metal of the latch. He did not want to go inside. The silence of the street was sharp, but the silence waiting behind that door was absolute. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind howl against the eaves, feeling the hollow space where his life used to be. He turned the key, the lock clicked, and he stepped into the dark, quiet hallway. The house felt like a tomb. Arthur turned back to the door and stepped out into the biting air again, needing the movement more than the shelter. He walked toward the main road, his boots crunching on the frozen slush. Near a rusted dumpster, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was a small dog, trembling so violently that its bones seemed to rattle against its skin. The animal was nothing but frame and matted fur, ribs pressing hard against the surface of its body. Arthur stopped. The dog froze, eyes wide, darting toward the street and then back to him. It did not bark. It did not growl. It simply shivered, a low, rhythmic sound escaping its throat. Arthur knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold. He reached into his bag, pulling out the sandwich he had saved for his own dinner. The bread was dry, but it was all he had. He held it out, palm flat, palm steady. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered, his voice cracking in the frost. "It is okay." The dog took a hesitant step forward, nose twitching at the scent of the food. Arthur placed the sandwich on the pavement. The dog stepped forward, its nose twitching against the cold air. It reached the bread, but it did not tear into the crust. It did not swallow a single bite. With a quick, sharp motion, the dog snatched the sandwich between its teeth. It stood there for a heartbeat, eyes locked onto Arthur, then spun around. It bolted. The dog vanished into the darkness of the alleyway, its paws barely making a sound against the frozen ground. Arthur stood up, his knees aching from the cold. He waited for the sound of chewing, for the rustle of paper, but there was only the wind. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Why would a starving creature refuse food? He took a step forward, then another. The dog was already gone, swallowed by the shadows between the buildings. Arthur reached the corner of the alley and peered into the gloom. He did not think, he did not weigh the risk. He simply started to walk, then picked up his pace, his boots striking the pavement with a new, urgent rhythm. Arthur pushed deeper into the maze of narrow passages. The streetlights here were dying, one by one, casting long, erratic flickers against the brick walls. He kept his eyes fixed on the small, darting shadow ahead. The dog moved with a desperate, frantic precision, weaving through gaps in fences and leaping over piles of frozen debris. Arthur followed, his breath coming in ragged white plumes. He rounded a sharp corner and the dog vanished behind a stack of rusted metal bins. Arthur stopped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He held his breath, straining to hear anything above the low hum of the wind. A soft, rhythmic scraping sound echoed from further down the lane. He moved forward, his boots sliding on patches of black ice. The air grew colder, smelling of damp earth and rotting wood. He passed a row of abandoned houses, their windows like hollow eyes staring into the dark. The dog appeared again, pausing at the mouth of a dark, narrow path. Arthur quickened his pace, his hands clenched at his sides. The environment felt heavier now, the silence pressing in from all sides. He reached the end of the alley, where the path opened into a desolate, overgrown yard. The dog was waiting near the edge of a structure. Arthur stopped at the perimeter of the yard. The ground here was uneven, littered with broken glass and frozen debris that crunched under his weight. Ahead, the shed stood like a jagged tooth against the night sky. Its walls were warped, the wood gray and brittle from years of neglect. A single rusted hinge groaned as the wind pushed against the door, a low, rhythmic sound that cut through the silence. Arthur took a step, then halted. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken weight. He looked at the dark gap where the door hung slightly ajar. What was waiting inside? The dog had vanished into that black space, and the silence that followed was absolute. Arthur felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He gripped his hands into fists, his knuckles white against the cold. He could turn back now. He could return to the warmth of his own home. But the memory of the dog, the way it had held the bread with such desperate purpose, kept his feet planted. He took a breath, the cold biting into his lungs, and moved forward. He reached the threshold and stopped again. The shadows inside were thick, swirling like ink. He leaned in, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom. Arthur leaned into the shed. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the smell of wet fur and decay. He squinted, his eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracked roof. In the far corner, huddled against a pile of rotting crates, lay a second dog. It was larger, its frame gaunt and still. One of its hind legs was bent at a sharp, unnatural angle, trapped beneath its own weight. The animal did not move as Arthur stepped closer. It only let out a shallow, ragged breath. The small dog trotted to its side, tail tucked low. It dropped the sandwich directly in front of the injured one. The bread hit the dirt with a soft thud. The small dog nudged the food forward with its nose, pushing it closer to the other's mouth. Then, it sat back on its haunches, watching. It did not take a bite. It did not even sniff the crumbs. It simply waited, its gaze fixed on its companion with a steady, unwavering focus. Arthur stood frozen in the doorway. The scene was stark. The small dog let out a low, soft whine, leaning in to lick the face of the injured one. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He had followed a scavenger, but he had found a guardian. Arthur did not hesitate. The silence of the shed was broken by the sound of his own movement as he stepped toward the corner. Cold earth bit him. Dog writhed. Arthur's hands soothed. He reached for the fastenings of his outer layer, pulling it free in one fluid motion. He bunched the heavy material, folding it into a makeshift nest. He lifted the larger dog, his arms straining under the weight, and tucked it securely into the warmth of the fabric. The dog let out a sharp, pained yelp, then settled, its breathing shallow against his chest. Arthur turned his attention to the small one. He reached out, palm open, waiting. The small dog hesitated, then stepped into his reach. Arthur scooped the creature up, tucking it against his side. He stood, the combined weight of both animals pulling at his shoulders. He walked out of the shed, the wind biting at his skin, but he did not feel the cold. He moved with a new, singular purpose, his stride long and deliberate. He was no longer walking home to an empty house. He was walking toward the clinic. The clinic doors swung open, spilling white light into the night. Arthur stepped inside, the sudden warmth hitting his face. He placed the injured dog onto the examination table. The vet moved quickly, hands working over the matted fur and the twisted limb. Arthur stood back, his hands empty for the first time in hours. He watched the staff clean the wounds and wrap the leg in clean, white gauze. The injured dog let out a long, slow breath, its muscles finally relaxing under the steady hum of the overhead lights. The small dog sat on the floor, watching the table with unblinking eyes. When the vet finished, the larger dog was resting, its breathing deep and rhythmic. Arthur walked over to the waiting area and sat on a plastic chair. The small dog trotted over, circled once, and curled tightly against his side. Arthur rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth of its body against his own. He looked around the quiet room. The emptiness he had carried since his wife passed had shifted. He had set out to save 2 lives, but as the small dog leaned its weight into him, he realized the rescue had gone both ways. The clinic lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the waiting room. Arthur sat motionless, his hand resting on the small dog's back. The rhythmic rise and fall of the dog's breathing matched his own. He looked at the bandages on the larger dog, then back at the small one, who had finally closed its eyes. The silence of the room was no longer cold. It was filled with the steady, living presence of two creatures. He stood up, his joints stiff, and walked to the door. He paused, looking back one last time at the space he had occupied for hours. The emptiness that had defined his home for years had been replaced by a new, quiet purpose. Kindness is a choice, and it ripples outward. If you believe there is still goodness in this world, share this video with someone who needs a reminder today. Small acts of care can bridge the widest gaps. And if a dog has ever taught you a lesson like this, tell me in the comments. I want to read your story. The world is full of people waiting for a sign. Let this be that sign. Arthur pushed the door open and stepped out into the night, the cold air no longer biting, but crisp and full of possibility. He walked toward his car, the small dog trotting faithfully at his heel. The streetlights flickered, but they did not go out. He moved forward, not into the shadows, but into the light of a new beginning.